ain't going back. Not gonna buy into all that. Hey, ain't gonna hide. Gonna let all the fears slide. Got mother nature, it's on my side. Got a whole of the loving growing inside.
All right. Hello, everyone. This is a talk I've been looking forward to for a little while now. I'm here once again with Tom Montalk. Today, we're going to discuss alien mind invaders, and let's get right into it. Tom, hello. And what would you say your definition of today's topic might be?
Well, so we're talking about basically the default installation within our own minds that we are born with, in addition to any additional artificial grafts that are put upon our psyche throughout life by our traumas, by mind programming if you're an abductee, and also by the negative projections from various toxic people and abusers in your life that end up inducing trauma within your soul that are undealt with and therefore eventually become almost like self-sustaining, almost autonomous parasites within your own mind.
All right. And how would that relate to being like alien? Do you mean something that's not natural to us or something that comes from the outside in?
Right, both actually, because when we're talking about, quote unquote alien, we're not only talking about the whole like extraterrestrial idea or interdimensionals or whatever they actually are. We're talking about anything that is foreign to our spirit, to our soul. So that includes, for example, even our own biological evolutionary programming, which is, you could say, antithetical to the values and the behaviors and the goals of the soul and the spirit itself. So we are kind of caught in a tension between our higher spiritual selves and our lower deterministic programmed biological selves. And then to make matters worse, there are also occult influences of a demonic nature, discarnate entities, uh, entity soul attachments, and also of course the alien component. So it's sort of a huge topic, but I think we can branch out in many different tangents.
Let's talk about soul attachments then. That's very interesting to me.
Mhm.
What would you say they are? How would you define them? And
Yeah.
how, yeah.
So the first book that I read on that was by Dr. William Baldwin, not the actor, just Dr. William Baldwin. He wrote a book called Spirit Releasement Therapy, and that was a manual for hypnotherapists to deal with people's so-called spirit attachments. In other words, for example, let's say you're a kid and you're driving by an accident scene, and you just kind of get entranced and you look over at this horrible accident that just happened. Not only is there an emotional trauma component, but if there is also a kind of soul resonance with the trauma that the person who just died experienced, there can be kind of a magnetic attraction where, in theory, that deceased soul might actually be drawn to you and enter your soul as an attachment, and then you will have it for as many years as it requires for it to either leave on its own volition or to be removed through a therapist. And so what happens is, in addition to your own personality that you came here with, you also wind up with an artificial external personality that actually belonged to someone else. So you might have heard, for example, about people who get heart transplants or organ transplants, and all of a sudden they start getting the tastes and the personality of the person who had that original tissue. That's a physical example. So you can imagine something like that, but more on a metaphysical level, where someone else's soul energy becomes a part of your soul energy artificially. It's not actually at your core, it's more like glommed on from the outside. And so you might start having issues. So, for example, you're a male and that soul fragment happened to be female. Let's say she was very promiscuous, and all of a sudden you as a male might feel starting to be attracted to men. See, it's a bleed over from another personality into you. Now, I'm not saying that all cases of homosexuality are that. I'm just saying that that's one of the potential contributing factors to sexual confusion. Okay. So that's just a small example, but it can get worse because let's say the person was highly depressive, very angry. Well, if you're not naturally that way, but you pick up that soul entity attachment, you will start getting those overlays upon your own personality. And that's an issue because it will interfere with your own life path, your own destiny, your own karma, right? And it's theorized that their karma can then interweave in with yours. So you'll start experiencing things that you shouldn't in life, painful experiences, corrective lessons that don't actually apply to you. They actually apply to this attached soul. So you actually take on more pain and more trouble in life than it's worth. So that's one example of an artificial graft that we would call a spirit entity attachment.
But wouldn't that be kind of your new karma then if you ended up in a situation where you picked up some external karma? Like, why would that happen, do you think, to somebody? You know, you're walking down the street, you're minding your own
Yeah.
business, you see a motorcycle accident, suddenly you want to, you know, eat more hamburgers because the person used to be overweight or something like that. As an example, like why, in your opinion, do you think something like that would come into contact with your life?
Like, do you think why? Are you asking like why would that be allowed from a higher perspective,
Yeah,
kind of
or why
thing?
would you be there for that to happen? Let's say you're not a victim, but
Right.
you're walking down the street, you picked up this extra karma, as you said.
Hmm.
Someone might say, well, what would the reason for that be, in your opinion?
Right. Right. So, in my personal opinion, I do think that our life experiences are a mix of things that are intended, that are good for you, okay, potentially, but also a mix of the roll of the dice. Because not everything here, I'm not one of those people that believes that every single little micromanaged thing is meant to be. I do think there is a probabilistic factor, because the thing is, we are physical beings, but we're also spiritual beings. So we have both a spiritual, metaphysical ordering to things, but then we also have the laws of physics, the laws of chemistry. It doesn't matter how spiritual you are, unless you're some super duper spiritual master, but aging is one of those processes that happens. It's programmed into our biology. And so some people might age less than others. But the thing is, in the end, we are mortal and we die, right? So that's an example of a physical thing that no matter your destiny, your mindset, whatever, eventually it's going to come because that's programmed into physicality. And there's so many other things like if you're out in the bright sunlight for 10 hours, you're going to get sunburned, you know? And the only cases where people overcome physicality are extreme cases of spiritual power or etheric or occult power. Now people can, they can walk through fire, they can walk on, those performers in India that step over nails or coals or something. That happens, but the thing is, you have to have exceptional abilities to override the laws of physics. So the thing is, sometimes things just happen. And because they happen, that's why within the metaphysical circles or the realm, the framework, there is a compensation mechanism. So for example, let's say at the bad roll of the dice, you die. You're not supposed to die, but it just happens. It's who knows how frequently that happens, but let's say that happens. Well, now you've been shortchanged. A higher part of your psyche realizes, okay, that wasn't supposed to happen, but checkmate, there's nothing we could do. It just happened. A good example might be an airplane crash. Maybe 90% of the people there are there destined to have that crash, but there could be a 10% remnant where, they had intuition to not get on the plane, but they got on it anyway, and they did, and
Mm.
then that happened, right? So if you get shortchanged like that, according to various mystics, including Rudolf Steiner, their idea is that you get compensatory karma that makes up for that shortchange. So maybe next time around you get a leg up where you get more help, you get a better life, you get more energy or something to make up for that. So you go through that path faster, better, smoother, and therefore you kind of pick up where you left off. So, and I know there's a lot of skepticism out there about the reincarnation cycle and karma being a control mechanism. And my personal view on that is that we're looking at a higher framework that's become partially corrupted. So it's a double-edged sword, and there are aspects of it that you can get trapped within that end up deviating you from your sole purpose for a very long time if you make the wrong choices or you die with a lot of trauma and confusion in your mind that you're totally attached to, and you kind of get lost into the lower astral planes. That sort of thing can happen, but once again, that's one of those roll of the dice kinds of things where it's bad, but in the future it can be made up for. Okay. Yeah.
How would you define corruption then? Is it about the topic we're talking about, like the alien mind invasion?
Yeah, so corruption, what is corruption, right? Corruption is basically a deviation from the intended divine order. So there is a certain intended order to things for the optimal growth of spiritual consciousness and soul and like spiritual evolution. And then corruption would be an aspect of it that seeks not that ends, but seeks to serve its own ends, which might be energy feeding, control, essentially those two things, and these are predatory forces that engage in this. And so the problem is, in order for this entire experience to even happen, and I'm talking about existence, life, consciousness, individuated consciousness, in order for all that to happen, there has to be free will. Because if we don't have free will, then we are all puppets, and therefore we have no choice. So anything we could ever do, it's already decided from the very
Mm.
beginning. So there's no point in playing it through. So if you think about, let's say, the infinite creator, okay, so if the infinite creator is omnipotent and omniscient, meaning knowing everything, then in that case, we would have no free will because it would already know every single quote unquote choice we would be making. So at the very, very moment of creation, the end would already be decided. Everything would be decided in between, and it would just be a movie that's already playing out
Mm.
that God, being omniscient, already knows exactly how the movie will go. So what's the point of making something if you already know exactly how it's going to turn out? I think as far as consciousness goes, most consciousness, even little animals, pets, right? They have playfulness, they have curiosity, they have the desire to experience things. They get entertained by new experiences. So I think that sort of drive would also play up to the very top of the scale, which could be the infinite creator. And that as much and as powerful as this infinite creator is, that there is still a remainder that is unknown. And that remainder that's unknown comes from the fact that its projection of individuated consciousness has free will. And therefore, there's still an element of novelty to things. So I think the novelty is what allows for free will, or free will is what allows for novelty. But, and this is the reason why I bring all this up, free will also allows the choice to turn against the intended divine order. Okay, so because if that weren't possible, then there really wouldn't be that level of free will. And so, unfortunately, there is the potential, just from the way this setup is constructed, for corruption to arise or for individual beings to choose to turn against each other instead of remaining within a harmonious cooperative whole. And actually, I mean, the fact that this choice exists makes the choice to align with the divine even more meaningful because you could have gone the other way, but you chose not to. And that means something, That's not anything that the infinite creator made you do. It offered you the choice, but you chose goodness, right? So I'm just saying that the way this place is set up allows for corruption, and therefore corruption happens, and we just have to deal with it.
So you mean the aliens, let's say, or how would you define,
Yeah.
let's say, an alien? Let's go there.
Okay, yeah. So regarding corruption, and this just ties back into the alien thing, the alien level is just one of many different classifications of life forms. Because on Earth alone, right, we have so many different animal species, we have plants, we get fungus and viruses and so on, bacteria, and then humans, of course. Now, if you look at theology, religion, for example, a lot of them do believe in these higher divine beings, non-physical, angelic beings. So let's say angels, okay? There's angels. So there's angels up here, and there's humans down here. And angels are very different from humans because they don't have physical bodies. They are essentially perfect, but they also don't have as much free will because they are perfect. So there's really no possibility for a deviation. I mean, there's a myth about the Lucifer rebellion, but I think that applied more to some ancient alien cataclysm than an actual rebellion of the actual true angels. But the thing is, if you have something that high and humans right down here, what about the space in between? Is there anything in between there? And conversely, between humans here and let's say the demonic realm down here, like really dark, non-physical, malicious beings, that's also a huge gap. And is there anything filling that?
Mm.
And actually, funny enough, the Vatican or the Vatican theologian Corrado Balducci, yeah, that's his name, and some others that were involved in the Vatican, they talked about this, the philosophy behind this. Like for example, if extraterrestrials were discovered to be real, how would that fit in with Catholic theology? How would it fit in with dogma? And what they concluded is that yes, humans are here, you got angels up here, demons down here, but there's this gap in between on both sides, and therefore you would have beings that are, let's say, more powerful than humans, more intelligent perhaps, maybe they got better technology that occupy that gap. And they might even be less physical than we are, but they're not non-physical, they're just less physical. So almost like quasi, semi-physical. And we would call that interdimensional or hyperdimensional. But it's not the same thing as being a ghost or being a demon or being an angel where it's like no physical body whatsoever. So I think that's where aliens fit in within the spectrum of creation. They are beings that are smarter, they got more psychic powers, better technology, they got more control and command of the situation of planet Earth than humans do, but they're not at the level of these so-called non-physical demons or non-physical aliens or angels, right? So that's so you got aliens that swing more in the positive direction, in my opinion, and ones that swing more in the negative, like hostile, predatory direction. And that one right there, that's like, as far as I'm concerned, that's 100% proven based on all the abductions and what's being done to people and just the way that they behave with lying, deception, manipulation, control. And so that then is, I think, a result of the fact that creation is inherently allowing for the possibility of corruption. So there are civilizations, there are individuals, even amongst humans, right, who choose the dark path. There are people who they suppress that voice of conscience within, and over time they just snip that connection to their spirit, their heart, and they go down the path of exploiting others and becoming very good at exploitation. They make a celebration of it. And once they start organizing with each other and become political factions
Hmm.
or nations or governments, right? I mean, you keep that going, you wind up with civilizations that are predatory. Okay. And even more so if that civilization ends up getting into genetic engineering and stratifying themselves into a caste system where the genetics are modified according to the function of each level of the caste. Right. So once you get to that level where you start messing with your own genetics, then your own personality, your own mindset is going to be heavily chained down by your genetic limitations. And so therefore you can have an entire civilization that is just by genetic default biased towards predatory behavior. And I think a lot of alien factions are of that type of orientation.
You describe modern civilization in many ways.
Yeah, it's like an above so below situation, like a fractal self-similarity, where humans are in many ways fractally self-similar to what's probably going on in the higher realms. Not only the higher spiritual occult stuff, but also the alien stuff in that intermediate level between humans and these higher or lower beings. So, if we have different kinds of humans with different orientations, then it's very likely that aliens themselves also have different orientations. Now, the only difference is that humans, because we're not psychic and because of our limited mode of communication, we are more fractured. We're not as cohesive or as aligned as a lot of these alien factions are. So, for example, if you and I were to become psychic overnight, and most humans became psychic overnight, it's not possible, therefore, to have as many misunderstandings with each other because we understand, where we're coming from mentally. And so, therefore, civilization would start to congeal, start to cohere into a more non-fractured state of existence. Okay, like we would become more aligned. We would get our differences sorted out way more quickly. Unfortunately, it can mean sorting out our differences by having everyone become predatory, being absorbed into that. And once that sort of political power grows, it can start squashing all the dissenters because it's psychic, so it knows if you don't agree with it and it can eliminate you. So you can have an entire planet in a very short amount of time, I'm talking about a few generations, turn into a relatively cohesive predatory civilization. Or conversely, we sort our differences out and we all start aligning with truth, with our inner spirit. And our planet becomes more cohesively and uniformly positive. Okay. And so I think when we talk about alien stuff, yes, there are different agendas, different orientations, some using free will for good, some using it for negative, but they are definitely more cohesive as a faction or as a civilization than we as humans are. Like right now, you can have a single human family where the brother is like a psychopath and then the other brother is like really good, right? And you can have a neighbor being this way. And I mean, we are so fractured, it's not even funny because we're not psychic, so we all can have our own private thoughts relative to each other and we can lie to each other. We can, you know what I mean? So there's too much fracturing amongst humans, but not so much amongst the alien group. And I think that's the main qualitative differences between us and them, even though there was a similarity between there being different orientations at each level.
Let's say psychic. Let's define that. Would you say that's a connection to heart?
Well, I would say no, actually. And
Okay.
here's why. Here's why. Because when we say psychic, we're talking about psychic powers, the ability to read someone's mind, to read their emotions, to influence those thoughts and emotions, and to pass communication non-verbally or just mentally between two or more beings. And that sort of ability, that has more to do with the way that your etheric body is set up. So, okay, so the physical body, right? We got the nervous system, the skeletal system, the neural system. Well, just add one more system to it, and let's call it the etheric system. It's like the aura. Okay, so when a person dies and something leaves them, and now they just look like a lump of meat, like a corpse. Well, what is it that left? It's this non-physical energy field that used to keep them alive. Well, that non-physical energy field, that is not so much your spirit or your consciousness. It's more this intermediate energy field that binds your spirit or consciousness to the physical body. So it's this intermediate thing. Okay. Well, it's as above, so below. Just we got aliens in this intermediate space. We also have this thing between spirit and the physical body within our own selves. And so this energy field, this etheric body or subtle energy body, its structure, its power, its reach, its size, those things are what determine how psychic you are. So if you're an average human, this energy field is going to be very low power. It's going to be just enough to keep you alive. Okay. But if you do certain exercises or you're born into an alien civilization that has the means of activating it, this etheric energy field can become very strong, very well developed. It can develop different structures within it. So, like for example, within Eastern mysticism or within the New Age field or meditation field, they talk about doing energy work and working on your chakras and activating your chakras, activating your third eye. Well, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about activating these different latent, subtle energy structures within your etheric body that act as new sensory organs and even as new extensions of your own brain. Okay. And that's what gives you these so-called psychic powers. But the thing is, you can develop these things without the need of becoming necessarily more heartfelt, more good as a person, more connected to spirit, because these things are more like muscles. They're more like muscles. So you can go to a gym right now and get huge muscles over time, but it's not going to make you necessarily a better person. It might make you a more strong-willed person, a more disciplined person, but and the thing is, some people are born with already a very well-developed etheric body. Maybe it's because of some past life thing or some fluke of the mom's energy field or who knows what. But some people are born naturally psychic. It could be due to genetics too. And the thing is, with these people who are naturally psychic, a lot of times the soul that goes into that body isn't necessarily ethically developed. So they might not be a higher, older, mature soul. They could just be whatever. And so now they have the psychic ability as almost a parlor trick. Or if they are of a more predatory orientation, they might realize, you know what? I can influence people's minds. I can use my psychic abilities to feed off other people's life force energies. And so they become energy vampires, or they become gamblers or something, or leaders of gangs or corporations or politicians even, using that psychic ability to get ahead of the competition, right? So yeah, so the thing is, if you do develop your heart, if you do develop your spiritual abilities, in time you will be gifted by your own higher self or spirit or God or whatever you want to call it. You'll be gifted powers in proportion to the purpose that you've been endowed with by the Creator to use your goodness for the help of others. So if you need psychic abilities, they will be activated within you, but it's activated from a higher divine source that knows what it's doing. Versus if you yourself go out and get some course on etheric energy activation or something, if you're doing it from the heart, then okay, good, right? But if you're just doing it to like pick up girls or be a manipulative politician or something, you can still do it, and you will gain occult powers. But of course, it's going to be used for nefarious purposes. And so it just goes to show that someone who is psychic does not necessarily mean that they are spiritual or good. It just means that they have an ability, just like the ability to flex your muscles or bend an iron bar because you're strong. It's another skill set that's more on the functional side of things rather than the spiritual side.
How would someone decide, let's say they're at a junction in their life and let's say their psychic powers are starting to activate or they have an intuition that something new is coming for them? How would they know which path, let's say,
Mm.
is the right one, heartfelt or selfish, as the ones you just described?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, each of us has a small voice within us, the voice of intuition and conscience. And through trial and error, you can figure out what that voice is versus the voice of the ego and the shadow and wishful thinking. Over time, you can kind of do trial and error and figure that out. But really, it's a matter of self-inquiry and intense self-honesty. Because that's the problem. If you are paying attention more to your ego, to your programming, you're going to be dishonest with yourself because you're going to feel this uncomfortableness in your heart, in your chest. You're going to feel that uncomfortableness, that tightness, but you're going to ignore it because, and actually, that's the way that negative entities, that's the way that they tend to tempt people and lead them off the path through telepathic suggestions. It's by inducing within them a certain feeling of hastiness or pressure or this it's almost like you're being pressured by a sleazy used car salesman where you feel like, okay, I just got to sign this because he's rushing me and whatever, and it's the best deal, and I only got like 5 minutes to make this deal. All those kinds of feelings that can be done psychically upon your mind,
Hmm.
and when you are under that grip, that voice of intuition that's in the back of your mind, it's very easy to ignore that. It's very easy to ignore that small voice because you're just so entranced and emotionally hyped up by this false artificial pressure. Okay. Versus if it's your actual true intuition, your true heart impulse, your true like higher spiritual impulse, it's not going to feel like this suppression of your logic and your clarity and your lucidity. It's not going to feel like that. It's going to feel more like a kind of openness, wholeness, complete rightness from top to bottom. It's going to feel almost like a gentle wind at your back, encouraging you lovingly to go forward. It's going to feel right. It's going to feel good, and it's going to make sense. So if you logically analyze it, it's also going to make sense. Okay, now sometimes, of course, you might be like, well, I don't know logically why I feel this way. I just feel like something is off. Okay, fine. That can also be intuition. But I encourage people to try to figure out what it is that's off about something. So you're reading a book, right? And you're like reading it, and okay, and you're like, oh, there's something off about this. Like something doesn't quite sit right. Now, some people will look at that and they will say, well, okay, you know what? I'm going to close the book and there's something off about that guy or that woman, and I'm just going to move on. And if you do that, what happens over time is you start building these half-baked opinions about people that you can't explain to anyone else. So if someone asks you, okay, well, hey, did you read this book? And you'd be like, well, yeah, but something fell off, so whatever. Well, that doesn't do them any favors because you're not explaining to them what was off about it, right? But imagine if when you get this intuitive ping, you really sit down and you start thinking hard, like, okay, like what is it about this that is off? If you start thinking logically, you'd be like, oh yeah, well, this person's ignoring this item of evidence, that item of evidence, he's contradicting himself here, contradicting themselves there. There's something sleazy about this, and like, oh yeah, that's a logical fallacy, right? If you do this and you kind of, incorporate that understanding, then in the future you can explain that to anyone. Someone asks you, hey, what's off about that book? You'd be like, oh yeah, well, A, B, C, and D. And the person's like, oh yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. Now you've done them a service by communicating that kind of wisdom, that kind of knowledge, versus if you just remain super duper vague and you know what I mean? So what I'm saying is, when you communicate or when you tap into your intuition and your heart, that is the deciding factor as to how to use these gifts. If you think about using it for a manipulative purpose, you might sense or feel that, yeah, it's not right. It's not good. And if you really thought about it, you could put that into words. You could say, okay, well, this is not good because this person has their own path, their own free will. And let's say it would be wrong for me to deviate them from their destiny by controlling their mind to, let's say, fall in love with me, something like that. You don't want to get engaged in that kind of thing at all. Like, don't ever, like, no matter if you use hypnosis, psychic powers, prayer, whatever, do not select a specific person and force them to become your life partner. The better thing to do is to put it out to the universe, like say, hey, I want someone like this, A, B, C, and D. And then if someone like that exists and it's right, they will come into your life. See, that's different from selecting already a specific person and bending them to your will, because that's black magic. That is a violation versus like putting out an ad in the ethers and then, someone out of their own free will coming towards you. Yeah.
So would that make someone also, I guess, if they followed that suggestion, which is, in my opinion, also a good one, more able to notice alien influences, since we're kind of talking about that? And like, let's say that person you just mentioned 5 years ago saw that motorcycle accident, had the karma attached to them, went about their life and then kept feeling something was wrong, and then suddenly developed their heart center to a higher level than it was 5 years previous. What could they do then? Let's say, practically speaking, so they notice they've got this.
Yeah. So typically two things will happen. One, they will develop their true heart center, their true soul, so sufficiently that it is of a vibration that the residing external entity can no longer be with, and the entity will be forced to leave. It'll be popped out. It'll leave. Okay. That's one possibility. The other possibility is that because you start developing something that is antithetical to this entity's impulses and nature, you'll start noticing the contrast. You'll notice that, okay, you know what? I have changed. I can feel myself changing, but now I sense that there is a foreign presence that is trying to revert me back to the old pattern. And it's not me, it's something else. And you can almost even like localize it in your body. Like I can feel that it's some restriction in the left side of my chest or something like that. And that's because on an etheric level, a lot of times these entities are attached to us on localized spots through various cords or hooks, or they've embedded themselves in there. Okay. And yeah, and so those are basically the two possibilities. And once you become aware that there is something like a foreign presence there, then at that point you can intellectually start researching it and maybe seeking out therapists who do the spirit releasement therapy, or funny enough, some people, even when they do ayahuasca or something, they get these things purged out of them because it's like laxative for the soul. That's what ayahuasca basically is. So yeah, I mean, there's different options, but the first step is to become aware of it. That's the first step with anything.
Have you had an ayahuasca experience?
No, no, I'm sensitive to. I mean, I basically live like a Mormon in terms of what I can consume. I don't even drink soda or caffeine or tobacco or alcohol because I can't. I mean, my body doesn't react well to it. So I think trying ayahuasca would be like way beyond that. So I haven't done it.
Right. So you've obviously studied some experiences people
Oh
have
yeah.
had in the expunsion. Uh,
Yeah, yeah, I'm speaking from other people's personal experiences because over the years I've communicated with like 30,000 people online, at least minimum, and that's a lot of people, and a large number of them have done the ayahuasca journeys, and I've chatted with them, so I've known dozens of people who've gone through it, and for the ones who do it in a therapeutic way, uh, it has good results, but those who do it recreationally a lot, it gets kind of questionable because then there's a matter of addiction and dependence and soul fracturing that happens when you keep on slipping out of your body too much. The human body can only handle so much, and it also depends on your genetics and who you are as a soul. So some people they can handle it. So obviously, throughout the ages, the trained shamans they would select people to become their disciples who have what it takes to go through all these soul shamanic journeyings and if they do soul fragment, their master can put it back together. So that's how they maintain the purity and okayness with it. But people like us nowadays, where we don't have that lineage, we don't have that selection, we kind of select ourselves to go through it. There's a greater risk, you have to be a little more careful. And some people do have really bad experiences, but other people have good experiences. But generally, there's enough risk that I tell people, like, I don't myself personally endorse it. I just bring it up as a possibility that
mm.
if the stars align for you and you feel that you need it and you've done enough research and you are sparing with it, then it can probably have a positive effect. Yeah.
Well, let's go back to the alien invaders, let's say, on a personal level. I recall from our last chat, like everyone else, you had some childhood trauma in your life. Like we've all
Mhm.
had childhood traumas. Did that lead to something of that nature for you in your life that you've since cleared or expunged, like that brought you on this path that you're on, which is unusual for most people?
Are you asking if I've had other childhood traumas that led to childhood abductions, or if the abductions themselves had trauma that I had to deal with in life?
Yeah, well, if you had a trauma that led to, let's say, alien invaders or attachments that you've had to
Mm.
expunge for yourself, like if you had a personal experience in dealing with what we talked about in something coming in, your vibration changing, maybe getting closer
Yeah.
to your heart, and then working it either out, or did you have external help from a shaman to cleanse it, or neither?
Right. So I haven't had any help at all because I've lived sort of a solitary life. I mean, other than me and my girlfriend, I don't really have any friends in town. And that's just because I'm so busy. And if I do make friends in town, most likely it'll be the kind of friends where it's just like drama and they call you up at 2 a.m. because they
Mm,
broke up with their boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever. And I can't deal with that stuff. I can't deal with drama anymore. I've had too much of it in my life for my own family.
mm.
Had a toxic household later on growing up and it was too much. So I'd rather focus on the fun stuff, the fun cosmic questions and science and music and interacting with people who are smart and who have self-control, who aren't big sources of drama. So that's what I'm into. But you're right. So my childhood growing up was relatively good. I grew up in Germany, and my dad, he was an electrical engineer from Germany. My mom, she was from Singapore. So my dad, he was into parapsychology, and my mom, she, being from an Asian background, was open to the idea of there being ghosts and spirits, and so on. And they purposely allowed me to. They didn't indoctrinate me with anything. They allowed me to explore, and if I had any questions, they would entertain me. And my dad would have all these conversations with me about science and everything. So my curiosity was definitely satisfied. Same with my grandparents. They were also always trying to teach me things. But as far as the trauma component, most of that had to do with occult stuff when I was a kid. So I had a 7 foot tall shadow being with glowing eyes show up behind me while I was watching TV one night when I was like 3 or 4 years old. And that scared the hell out of me. And that happened actually a couple of times. I had that. I had alien abduction experiences when I was a kid. I was always talking about the gray men or the stone men to my grandma. I was scared to death of owls. And that's one of those screen memories that are used with abductions to cover up the fact that you have been abducted by aliens. They install this image of an owl or a deer or a giraffe, anything with those black eyes. those creepy black eyes. And so I was very scared as a kid, especially sleeping at night. I kept the lights on. I kept the cassette player going with a story time tape going. I basically slept with one eye open, you know. So it was a very scary time period for me as a kid. And so over the years later on, as I got older, I did have to deal with fear and paranoia in general about things. Because even as a kid, I could sense that there was something watching me. And at the time, I didn't know about aliens, so I blamed it on God. So I was always like having imaginary conversations with God, like why are you doing this? Like, why are you watching me? Because I felt like a malicious presence. And actually, you know what? Maybe that's some past life thing tying into being a Gnostic many lifetimes ago, where I was kind of upset with a Yahweh deity or something. Who knows? But anyway, in this life, it was actually aliens and demonic entities that were watching me. But I didn't know about them, so I could only blame it on the only metaphysical thing I knew at the time, which was this idea of God, unfortunately. So, um, of course, I have a good relation with I would think I would have a good relation with divine forces now because I try to do my best. I try to be a good person and monitor my thoughts and so on. But the trauma residue from that time period, I think it had biological effects on my amygdala. So I'm a little more tightly wound now, like more susceptible to stress now than I would be otherwise. I'm more threat oriented, so I think more about what could go wrong, what secret motives could be happening amongst people that are kind of questionable. So I'm more thinking about like, hey, threat, 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 threat. How do I mitigate this threat, both on a personal level and also on a societal, global level? And so that's the reason why I do tend to write a lot about negative alien stuff and occult forces and how to discern good from evil and deception from truth and so on. It's because, in a way, I was primed for that by my childhood experiences. Now, fortunately, I think I might have made some good out of it because if I didn't have those experiences, I would not be writing or even having this conversation right now.
Mm.
You know, I wouldn't ever have had to develop the ability to discern or to do the amount of research that I've had into demonology, ufology, the whole alien abduction field, for example. And so it was a double-edged sword. You know, it was a mixed bag. But that's sort of the way things work in life, where the negative things that you go through, they're given to you as gambles, where the gamble is there's a potential positive reward payoff that if you make it through, if you use it for good, if you learn from it, if you become stronger from it, now you can use that. You're almost like become immunized by it, and you can use it as a force for good to help others, you know, with to discern these kinds of situations. But not everyone succeeds in that task. Some people they get crushed by it, they get damaged, they get traumatized, and they never get over it. And so they let it define their lives and they actually become weaker for it. So you can imagine how over a lifetime or multiple lifetimes of these gambles, some people gamble themselves into a debt. They never win or they rarely win. And things just keep getting worse and worse. And they start blaming, projecting, not taking accountability, not digging themselves out of the hole.
Mm.
Yeah. And so they go into this downward spiral, you know, and it's very easy for those types to get so upset with the entire thing that they think the entire thing is a deception and a lie and
Mm.
everything's a trap. You know what I mean? They become this almost like super black pilled doomer kind of person. And it's understandable, you know. I mean, maybe their life sucks, and maybe they see how much the world sucks. But the thing is, they they had the ability to apply their free will, their awareness to overcome a lot of these challenges. And for whatever reason, they didn't, right? But the opportunity was there. And also, you know, there's also the ability to think about the future and apply your awareness towards that as well. So if you are blindsided, if you're only looking at one color, if you're only looking at black and white and not like, you know, the beautiful, beautiful other colors of life, then you're only going to ever see what reinforces your own bias, right?
Mm.
And so people's perceptions, their choice of perception ends up becoming a self-reinforcing feedback loop that keeps them bound within their limitations and within negativity. So that's why, once again, free will is the ultimate thing within this existence because it gives you the ability to, once you become aware of a problem or become aware of yourself, to choose to break out of that feedback loop by ignoring the past, ignoring your present circumstances, and choosing for the future what you truly want, in spite of the present, in spite of the past. And that's how you break from these old patterns. You know what I mean? So, yeah, I mean, as horrible as this world can seem sometimes, there is still a remainder of free will that allows us to change it, both in our own personal lives and also in the world at large. And that's why, you know, that's why I don't really, I remain generally optimistic about things because there's always a way out. There's always a cheat code or a cheat level that, like in video games, where you can kind of circumvent what seems like an impossible obstacle. So I think as long as we keep that in mind and we have hope and we apply our intuition and our logical abilities, usually we can overcome most obstacles.
Well, how did you do it from having, the 7 foot monster following you and some of the other challenges you had to not going down the dark path and going towards more of what you're sharing right now, kind of, let's say, the helpful path?
Yeah, so like you're asking, like, how did I get out of that situation?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. For me, actually, it was a combination of things. Number one, it involved a lot of self-inquiry through a notebook. So writing down my issues, my questions, my problems, my shortcomings, and starting to peel back the layers through introspection on what the root causes of these things were and what the causes of those causes were, and until you trace it back. And each step along the way, you come to certain realizations, certain intuitions about things, and that can lead to certain actions as well, like self-forgiveness, forgiveness of others, and also knowledge on how to prevent such problems in the future. So that's a sort of a prophylactic or a preventative measure that can make you feel better. Because here's the thing: if you're someone who doesn't really learn from your experiences, but you pick up some book on new age self-help and it's all about forgiving yourself and forgiving others, well, sure, you can do that. You can forgive yourself, you can forgive others, you can heal the trauma that you've had before. But if you didn't learn anything from it, it'll happen again because you'll attract a similar abuser, a similar situation, and you'll go through it all again. And then what? Like, are you going to keep forgiving these things over and over again? The thing is, life does not reward you for that. Life rewards you for standing up for yourself, for having love for your own soul, your own free will, your own spirit, first and foremost, before you start loving others. And that's why you can learn from life, actually. Like, life will give you feedback on what works and what doesn't, as long as you interpret it correctly. So if you have a lesson and experience that keeps repeating, then you're probably missing something. Um, unless it is something that keeps happening not for a spiritual reason, but because of a physical weakness. Like, for example, if you keep forgetting to lock your door in a high crime area and you keep getting robbed, that's not really a spiritual thing. That's a physical thing because you didn't secure the lock, You know what I mean? So so some things are not within the grasp of, let's say, your vibe or your spiritual stuff. Some things are like physical, and then for those things, you have to use intellect, resourcefulness, research, getting legal protection, physical self-defense protection. So there is that element that we have to keep mindful of, but there's so much else also that does depend on our choices, our spiritual nature, our path, like how many lessons and growth opportunities we've let pass by, or that we've incorporated into our wisdom. So life is a mix. Life is a mix of the magical and the mundane, metaphysical and the physical, and our wisdom and our intellect and our intuition calls upon us to use the entirety of our assets to deal with the entire spectrum, from the more metaphysical to the physical. And I think that's partly a way of rounding us out as human beings. Because if we lived only in a spiritual realm and only dealt with magic stuff, we really wouldn't have much need for intellect, for willpower, for physical balance and everything like that. Conversely, if we only lived in the physical world, then there would be no need for intuition or, heart or empathy like that either. But the fact that there's both calls the most from us, and I think that sort of maximizes the consciousness growth opportunity of our experience here.
How did you end up dealing with the 7 foot being that was behind you when you watched TV? Did it just go away in your life? Did you have an interaction with it? Is it something that disappeared one day?
Yeah, as a kid, somehow I was so scared of these things because they were always happening, but eventually I did sort of outgrow it. I think partially the issue was that as a kid, your brain waves are different, and you're not as rooted in your body. And so between the ages of 2 and I think maybe 4, your brain waves are more in the alpha and theta range, which if you research meditation, out of body experiences, things like that, that brainwave range is when you get perception of hypnagogic, like psychic impressions, maybe seeing things that your physical eyes cannot see.
Hmm.
So I do think that kids, just by virtue of their brainwaves, are probably able to perceive things that most adults cannot, because most adults are now operating in the beta brainwave state, which locks you out of a lot of these weird phenomena. So eventually, as I got older, I think my brain just naturally changed and my brain waves changed. So um, I think that was part of it. But here's the thing, after college, when I moved down to Florida, um, things got very weird in a almost gang stalkery, occult harassment, alien abduction sort of way. And reality actually became very scary once again. I mean, I had a lot of weird occult phenomena. My girlfriend did too. And so between both of us, life became kind of nightmarish for about a year or 2 years. And it was because of our fearful, paranoid vibes that it seems to be that it attracted more of it. It attracted way more of it. And the way that we overcame it was two ways. Number one, we did things to our environment to reduce the fear component. So because I had actual electromagnetic beams coming in through my window, which I measured with a meter. I wasn't like hallucinating it or I wasn't paranoid. I was actually confirming it on my meter that there was something irradiating us through the windows. Maybe it was from cell phone towers or police radio towers or satellites or something. I don't know. But it would come in through the window and it would give us nightmares, headaches, muddled thinking, and make us feel really tired and fatigued. Okay. And so I got these aluminized mylar space camping blankets. They're like metal foil kind of things. And I put them over the window to block it. And I also put a alligator clip onto it that I ran to the ground hole of the electrical outlet. Okay. And what that would do is it would absorb these electromagnetic waves and channel them into the ground. So it would keep the apartment clear. And, no more headaches. Our thinking was clear. We didn't have nightmares anymore. Uh, but then a week later, those beams would come in through a different window that they didn't before. So it like adjusted itself. And it would come in and we'd get the same symptoms. I'd put foil over that window. And this happened like 3, 4 more times until the only window left was the very back little tiny window next to the kitchen that was facing another building. So there's another building in the way that was blocking things. And the beam didn't come through that window because I guess the building was blocking it. But inadvertently, because we had all these windows covered in foil, it created a very safe feeling because we couldn't see outside. So that's the scary shadow stuff that used to be outside the window. We couldn't see them anymore. Aliens, all that stuff was kind of kept out. And because of that, we started feeling safer. So the fear level started to reduce. And in proportion to our fear level reducing, these phenomena also started reducing.
Hmm.
So eventually it got to a point where, okay. And also Carissa, she had a communication, I guess, from a higher spiritual source that told her essentially the importance of controlling your fear and how your vibe, your frequency interacts with that and kind of attracts it. And that really clicked for me. That made a lot of sense because prior to that point, I hadn't yet made the connection between our own internal emotional, psychic, mental state and these external phenomena. And so with that and with this reduction in fear level overall, eventually it became very integrated into us that your mindset, your emotional vibe, I guess you could say, that if you control that and you get rid of the paranoia, you get rid of the fear, you can get rid of so many of these phenomena. So we reduced it by like 90%. So there's only like a 10% remnant, which is still there today. And I think that 10% remnant is the objective remainder of what is actually there, independent of us, independent of our thoughts, of our, wishes and intentions and vibe and so on. There's an actual objective component. Just as right now in your town, I'm sure there are criminals, there are thugs, there are psychopaths, right? And they are there objectively, but they're not in your life because of your actions, your mindset, everything that you're doing in your life, of who you are, you're not crossing paths with them. But if, for example, if you started believing that you were being gang stalked and you got extremely fearful about that and very paranoid, and you're always like looking out your window and fearing that they're about to get you at any moment, well, that's dramatically going to increase the probability that one of those psychopaths that exists right now is going to be hovering around your house, breaking in, doing things to you, slashing your tires or whatever. So what I'm saying is these alien forces, these occult forces, they exist, they're not products of our mind. However, our mind, our beliefs, our vibe, where we project our emotional energies can determine the probability that they enter our lives. So some people who are extremely fearful, extremely paranoid about, let's say, demons or aliens of that, that sort of order, they will get not only abductions, but they will get alien demonic activity in their everyday waking life, even during daytime. And it gets so severe that it's like, you got things running around on the roof, you got like lights constantly every single night, you're getting poked and prodded and things are tugging you out of the body. Like your entire life gets wrapped around this idea that you're constantly being harassed, So you're in an intense vortex, this intense negative feedback loop of these entities because you are engaging with it. You are quantum entangling with it, and it gets extremely bad, right? But if you control your mind, you get rid of the fear, you focus on more mundane things, more happy things. I mean, heck, play video games, watch comedies, watch cool TV shows, whatever. Get your mind off of it, and then you start deflating that bubble, that fear bubble that has been sustaining this interaction with these other interdimensional entities for the longest time. So for me, it was a combination of reducing my fear, my emotional attachment and entanglement with it, and also me doing meditation or nap practices where if I'm in a negative mindset, whether it's irritation or fear or paranoia or something, I would lay down and I would just focus on the idea of peace, calm, joy, optimism, gratitude, the feeling of safety and security. And I would meditate on that concept for as long as it took until I actually felt it fully. Okay. And this would take maybe 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes. But just by focusing on it gradually, incrementally, bit by bit over the minutes, that emotional feeling would be whipped up within me, almost like trying to start a fire and like feeding it with like little kindling and then sticks and then like bigger sticks. It's kind of like that. And so the emotional energy of it, the emotional component, that is for some reason the deciding factor about to what degree you anomalously attract these kinds of entities. Okay. But once again, just because you can do that with your mind and your emotions, that does not mean that these entities are figments of your imagination or that your mindset alone is enough to keep them out of your life. Because as I mentioned, there's still that 10% objective component where if they want to abduct you and they need to abduct you for breeding purposes or some other purposes, they will do it. It's just they'll do it more quietly and without as much pomp and circumstance and bells and whistles as they do in a person who is just totally paranoid about them and thinking about them constantly. Then it's like off the charts, the amount of paranormal activity that they have.
You had any personal abduction experiences?
Yeah, especially as a kid. So as a kid, I had a number of alien abduction experiences. They would always begin okay, so at the time I was in Germany. I was like 3 years old, 4 years old. And this would be in I think it was like 7 or 8 story apartment building in Neustadt in Germany. And would happen during daytime. And my dad would be at work. My mom would be with me in the bedroom because I guess we were laying down taking a nap or something for the afternoon. And that's usually when it would begin. And she would be activated and she would tell me like, Thomas, well, bleib da, like me, like stay here. So Tom, stay here. And then she would go out into the rest of the apartment. And I could tell that there's all this activity happening out there. Like it was buzzing with activity, like almost like when you're at a party and you go into an empty room and you close the door. So you're by yourself, but you can tell the rest of the apartment has a lot of stuff going on. Okay. So anyway, then the door would open and like half a dozen grays in cobalt blue suits would rush into the room and try to get me. Now, I've explained this in other shows, but I love explaining this part. We used to have a bed where you could lift up the end of the bed and you put like pillows and blankets underneath. It's like a spring-loaded flip-up bed. So because it was easy to flip up and I was only 3 years old, I could still flip it up. So I crawled in there and I would close it except for like a little gap that I could see out. And I could see the gray alien legs kind of running back and forth, not knowing what to do, how to get me out. And I'd be in there for like 5 minutes, 10 minutes until they had to call a supervisor who would come in. They might have been humanoid, I'm not quite sure, but at that point, my memory would black out and I would only have fragments after that. Now, since that time, it's harder for me to remember abductions because the older you get, the more non-plastic your mind becomes, the more it's not as elastic, and so they can fracture your mind. They can compartmentalize your mind way more easily as an adult than they can when you're 2 years old, 3 years old, 4 years old, and you're still in that theta brainwave state, and your mind is still very plastic. It's like trying to crack a thing of silly putty. You just can't do it. But an adult mind, you can sever part of it off and have the abduction experiences happen within that alternate personality, and then when you get back from the abduction, they seal that off, and then you can't remember what happened during the abduction. So the only thing that you really have is you have precursors leading up to the abduction. Like for example, ear ringings, your cat acting very frazzled and like looking around and seeing like invisible things moving around. You can have that when you're lying down and you go into sleep and you close your eyes. You might start seeing gray alien faces pop into your hypnagogic vision, for example. And all that is your own subconscious using its very weak ESP powers to pick up on these things, and it translates that into a visual image. So you'll start seeing the black gray alien eyes, for example, like in your field of vision. And you see, so if you have that and you got the cat acting weird and you get ear ringings and other weird signs, then probably an abduction is going to be happening that night. And then afterwards, you might wake up all of a sudden feeling like you hadn't even been asleep. Like, because when you sleep for a while and then you wake up, you're kind of groggy and your eyes feel kind of dry or something. Well, no, you wake up suddenly and it's like you've been awake for the past couple hours. Or maybe your body temperature, your skin isn't even right. Like you're under the blanket, but your skin is cold as if you were outside,
Mm.
you know, walking around at night or something. Or or conversely, you might get your full 8 hours of sleep, but you wake up feeling like you've only gotten 4 hours of sleep, like you're totally just run over and exhausted, and it doesn't make any sense. So there are different incongruencies like that, which can let you know indirectly that you've had an abduction. Okay.
It,
And also afterwards, you can have bruises, you can have weird anomalous scratches and marks. So if you're an abductee, clearly before you go to sleep, just kind of check your body over. Look for bruises, look for cuts or scratches or something, and then check again the next morning, and then you'll definitely see bruises appearing overnight that doesn't make any sense. So there are ways to still tell, and that's how I tell. And once I determine that an abduction has happened, I go into preventative measures because what happens is some abductions are only used for breeding, like harvesting eggs and sperm and creating hybrid babies or whatever they're doing. Okay. But I think a lot of abductions are also used for behavioral conditioning. So they take you on board, they put you down. I'm not 100% sure how this happens, but I think they engage in a kind of psychically augmented hypnosis to implant post-hypnotic suggestions into your mind, into your subconscious during the abduction experience. And then after they put you back, those hypnotic commands, they trigger a couple days later, up to a week later. In my experience, it's never been more than a week. So within about like 1 day to 7 days, those hypnotic commands can trigger and they can induce a very intense pressure on you to do a certain thing or not do a certain thing or react a certain way to another person saying something, which can create a conflict that, I don't know, breaks up a friendship or relationship or something like that. And all these kinds of manipulations, they don't seem like much, but they do have effects because they affect the future. Right. So, for example, if you and a friend are really good at researching and you're having good conversations and you're both like getting a lot out of it, well, if both of you get abducted, or even just one of you gets abducted, you get mind programmed, and 3 days later, that program activates, and all of a sudden you just feel like really irritated at this person, and they say something that feeds into that thought that's been implanted, and it confirms it for you. Well, even if they don't know it, well, then all of a sudden you feel like I don't want to talk to this person anymore, and then you don't, and then you miss out on the next like 5, 10 conversations, which could have taken your life in an amazing direction in terms of your spiritual realizations. So you have to understand that these alien forces, they don't they don't use a heavy hand in manipulating the future or the timeline. They work more in a Zen kind of way where they target specific little flip points on the timeline. They target those and they do the tiniest manipulation needed in order to switch the future. Okay. And maybe it's not only aliens doing it, maybe occult forces like demons, they do it as well. I wouldn't rule out that even certain Black Ops government programs do that because they got remote viewing. Like remote viewing is a thing. Everyone now understands that secret government programs, they've been experimenting with remote viewing. And if you have good enough remote viewing and you look at a future, you can trace it back about what is the inception point for that particular future. And if they don't want that, all they have to do then is reverse the remote viewing to make it remote influencing. In other words, remotely psychically influencing someone, and you target that inception point telepathically. So you can target that person, make that person, him or her, do something that they wouldn't have or not do something that they would have just through telepathic pressure. And that then ends up changing the original future that had been remote viewed. Okay. So I think certain Black Ops government groups can probably do that sort of thing and they've been engaging in that. And the reason why I say that is because so I used to get these weird noises in my ear and I still get them sometimes. Well, one time I got them while I was in a semi out of body state. So I had woken up out of a dream. I wasn't fully back in my body yet, and all of a sudden I heard my ear making this noise, and I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna remote view like what the source of this thing is, and so I focused on it, and yeah, all you have to do is mentally focus on it to try to trace it back to the source through just intend it, and all of a sudden I was out of body, and I popped into an underground military base that had like cinder block walls that were painted kind of this beige yellow. and there were three vertically stacked tanks, like giant aquariums with people floating in them, hooked up to sensors and wires, and a man in an old brown corduroy suit, or not a corduroy, but like a brown suit, sitting in a chair with a like a tablet or a clipboard or something, reading a script, like commanding them what to do. So that's pretty weird, and I could sense that they were psychically triangulating in on me, which is kind of weird. I mean, maybe it was a dream experience, but I don't think so because I definitely was out of body and I was like going somewhere when I intended to trace the source of this noise. And so I do think that that's one potential example of a remote influencing or remote viewing attempt. The way that it's done nowadays versus like in the old days where you just walk into a room with like paper and you start sketching out your remote viewing thing. I think nowadays they use chemically, possibly technologically enhanced psychics, maybe even genetically altered psychics, to be triangulated upon a particular target under the direction of a script reader or director of the operation. And I think that's closer to what's being done nowadays. But the reason I mention that is because these kinds of things can happen, and they're not all alien. Some could be human, some could be occult entity. And so yeah, it's sort of a jungle out there, you know. It's
It
just
sounds
fact of the
crazy.
matter.
Tom,
Yeah.
can we take one quick second break? And then I want to
Yeah.
get into the why. The big question, why? Everything you
Yeah.
just mentioned. Why do you think that's happening? Why you specifically? There's a few whys, and I guess you said I tell, so it sounds like you mean current experiences as well.
Yeah, like I said, even though I've eliminated 90% of the phenomena that shows up in my daily conscious life, I still have a kind of 10% remnant of things that are happening. And this 10% encompasses everything from the occasional ghost infection, you could call it, like, occult entities that are setting up shop in my home and I have to do things to get them out. That sort of thing happens. And it doesn't mean that I'm evil or something, because this thing actually happens to a lot of people. It's just that they don't recognize it's happening. They don't realize that they have occult entities. I'm talking about ghosts, possibly demons or minor demons that have come through portals or have followed them home from a bar or some public place and now are kind of lurking in their home looking to cause trouble. So I get that. I get the occasional abduction still, both alien and possibly my lab military abduction stuff. What else? Dream manipulation, dream influencing by all kinds of sources. And the only way to combat that is either prayer and intention beforehand or lucidity, like lucid dreaming practice. You can catch these things if you're lucid. So yeah, I still get it. But as to your question about like why it's happening, I think it's two reasons. I think one reason, as I covered at the beginning of this interview, is that sometimes things just happen because they can, because by us being born into this physical environment, into this etheric environment, uh, that environment comes with certain rules that can be exploited by beings, right? Just as just by virtue of you being physical, you in a way agree to aging, to twisting your ankle, when you're running around or something, right? These things happen. And so sometimes things just happen because they can. But then there's also, I think, a spiritual component as well, where like in my case, as I mentioned, when I was a kid, I had these experiences, but in a way, the gamble paid off for me because it got me interested in researching these subjects so that I could learn a lot about them. I could hear from hundreds, if not thousands, of people who had similar experiences and learn from that in order to distill a kind of playbook about how these forces work and how to get rid of a lot of these manipulations, and then, talk about it on a show like this right here. Okay. So I think sometimes there is a destiny component or a spiritual gamble payoff component as well that is allowed at a higher level in order to train us, immunize us, prepare us, make us stronger and more aware in order to use it for our own good and also for the benefit of helping others. Okay. Now, just because you can use a bad thing for good does not mean that that bad thing in itself was intended to be good. Okay. So just because like okay, so like if you get an alien abduction stuff and you're scared all the time and so on, but then you learn to overcome your fear and you become more like you have more what they call it, you're more tempered, you've got more poise, right? More equanimity. That's a word I was looking for. So when you have that, that does not mean that those aliens were intending to turn you into a Zen master. You know what I mean? They didn't intend that. They intended to feed off your energy, to induce fear, to harvest your genetic stuff, to mess with your timeline and so on. Um, but yeah, I mean they didn't intend that to help you out. But the fact that you can make good of it, I think that's the reason why at a higher level, higher positive things that are protecting you allowed it to happen. Is because there was a potential payoff, and it's a payoff that perhaps could not have happened any other way. So
Free
I
will
think
component, I guess, comes into it there.
right, yeah, yeah. Sometimes negative things are used for good because they are the agents or the mediator of that good, and there was no other mechanism for it to happen.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
let's take this in a bit of a different path. I mean, there's 100 questions I can ask. What do you feel on choosing your parents? You think you have some say
Oh
in
yeah,
that before you get here?
I think so. Yeah. So I have some pre-life memories. I have one memory of being in a gathering place, almost like a room, and there were maybe five, six, up to 10 other people there, and they felt like friends or family, that I was hanging out with. And periodically, I would leave that place to check up on my gestating body in my mom's womb. So I would enter the womb, and I'd be in the womb for a while, kind of listening, feeling things out, and then yeah, and then I'd go back to the other place. And then as the pregnancy progressed, I would spend less and less time in that other realm and more time within the womb until eventually I was born. And I kind of remember I have some hazy memories of being born. It was pretty traumatic. It was very sudden, like because everything you knew up to that point was just like this nice, comfy, dark space, right? So, but then all of a sudden everything changes. Then you're outside and there's noise, and it was kind of chaotic. Um, but I do not have memories necessarily of, let's say, hovering above my parents from a distance and saying, "Hey, I want to be born to these two types, okay, these two people." But I have heard of many accounts of past life regressions and even conscious memories, even kids themselves who say like, "Mommy, Daddy, I chose you before I came here," something like that. There are many reports of that kind of thing happening, where kids report their past lives, they report who they were, what they did before being born. They talked about, "Mommy, I chose you," that sort of thing. So that does happen. Um, but I can't say that that's the case for every single last human being, because just as in psychology, you've got regular psychology, but then you've also got abnormal psychology that deals with mental illnesses. I think the reincarnation process and selecting your parents and going into a body, I think there's also an abnormal pathological version of that, where things don't go right, or you don't have a choice, or so. Something I mentioned in a recent Twitter space. This is kind of creepy. It's the idea that after death, okay? So after death, some souls, they don't make it to the full afterlife, like the spirit afterlife, where they have the reconciliation, the life review, the healing, and getting to talk to your departed loved ones and being reunited with them. They don't make it to that point because they're so troubled or so mentally damaged that they carry that trauma with them even after they die.
Hmm.
And so they wind up in these middle or lower astral planes almost as lost souls. Okay. Now, if some of these souls are not only lost, but they're also so dark, like they were serial killers in life, or they're extreme psychopaths in life, or something like that. They chose a dark path. From what I heard from my different readings of occult studies, some of these souls end up joining the demonic hierarchy. They become part of it, and they become in service to it. It's almost like a street orphan who becomes part of a kid gang and eventually gets recruited into the mafia. It's kind of like that. So they get taken under the wing of some big, powerful mafia person, and they end up doing the bidding of that thing. Well, the same thing with these dark human mini psychopaths. They become disciples of the bigger, major psychopaths, which would be like demons that are centuries old. Okay, that have been in the state. Now, the reason why I mention this is because there appears to be an illegal, illicit way of circumventing the regular reincarnation cycle, and for these lost souls to be put back into human bodies by force, by subterfuge, by stealing. Okay, so they're put back into a human body, stealing a body essentially, and even though they're incarnated now, even though they're living life now, they were forced there by their demonic masters to serve the demonic agenda within the physical form. So they perhaps could become major politicians,
Yeah.
or the royal family, royal bloodlines that keep reincarnating into their own bloodline by cycling between this lower astral plane and the physical plane. They go back and forth, that sort of a thing. So what I'm saying is that there are weird exceptions to the regular way that things go, where you can have these weird occult like loopholes that get exploited. And so that's why I'm saying I don't think everyone necessarily chooses their parents, because there are lost souls that could be coming back here that get forced here. And they could be born into abusive, very, very abusive families, and they could become part of the human trafficking network, or organ harvesting, all the weird, really dark stuff, where you wonder like what souls choose to go into that darkness to become either victims or perpetrators of these heinous things that are going on planet Earth. And it's like, well, what if they're not even reincarnating souls? So what if they are dark souls that are lost, and they just kind of get shuffled between hell here on Earth and quote unquote hell in the afterlife within the astral plane, right? These are the things that aren't really covered in a lot of afterlife books because
Yeah.
it's just too dark, right? But you do find this kind of stuff in the more objective, esoteric, occult books. I think Rudolf Steiner might have talked about some of this, maybe Dion Fortune and some of these old school esoteric people that have more knowledge of these things and aren't trying to sugarcoat their stuff in order to sell more copies like people do nowadays.
Have you met any of these politicians personally? Had any experiences of that?
No, nope, I haven't. And I think, well, partly it's because I don't get out much, but the other reason, of course, is because my life path, my vibe, my mindset is so opposite that it'd be very unlikely that I would cross paths with someone like that. I only really tend to cross paths with either people that are vehicles for negative entities to try to mess with me, or people that are more of my vibe level that I have a reason to interact with. Right. So it's either the more positive, good stuff, or the attack vectors. That's pretty much the only thing I get. But I've never really interacted with politicians or anything like that, celebrities even.
I certainly met one once, next Prime
Really?
Minister of Canada. I went to a party when I was dating at the time a girl that came from one of the rich families in Canada, the Richardsons. They used to own one of the big stock brokerage firms. And I went to a Christmas party and I met a prime minister who was only a prime minister for 6 months from a minority government or something in one of those huge rooms, the oak panel, big fireplace, the $10
Yeah.
million house. Scared the bejesus out of me. And like I walked up
Wow.
and he said, "You better treat my niece well." Like he just gave me this look. And I hid in the kitchen the rest of the night. I remember. Yeah, 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 totally.
Yeah.
It's kind of this is I was only 29 at the time, a while ago.
Mhm.
So even my computer just jumped. So it kind of started me on the path of kind of understanding that maybe not everyone you meet, if you look in their eyes, is fully human. Because there certainly was something about him that gave me a visceral feeling of, wanting to poop your pants, let's say, is just him saying
Yeah.
hello to you.
Right, exactly, right. And I've known people and I've known of people who ever since they were a kid, they would already have a lot of occult harassment and occult attention. They might start hearing voices in their heads. They might, it's almost like having an imaginary friend, but it's not really a friend at first. But the thing is, the more you do its bidding, the more it does you favors. And so this symbiotic parasitic relationship can develop over time, where by the time they're in their teens or whatever, they are very much in the pocket of this dark entity that has already been grooming this person since a very young age. And so therefore the entity can use this person as a vessel to do all sorts of things, to become a serial killer, to become a dark politician or whatever. And it's kind of creepy to think that perhaps this sort of activity is so common that you can have an entire political party that has been set up on the behest of demons for the purpose of propagating a demonic agenda within human society in order to maximize suffering. Okay, I think they probably do have inroads into the physical plane through such proxies. And the same thing can be also said for negative aliens and maybe even positive aliens. That the human realm, we're basically almost puppets on the stage, being directed from behind the curtain by various kinds of forces. Some more positive, some more negative. And so when we are living our everyday conscious lives, we are playing out sort of a story. We still have free will, we still have free will, but it's kind of like one of those online role-playing video games where you're this character walking around a medieval landscape and you've got different missions, right? You think you have free will, and you do, but most of the game is artificially constructed. A lot of the key narratives in the game story have been pre-scripted by the writers and the programmers, right? And I do think that in our everyday lives, it is a similar thing where there are agreements, competitions, maybe even battles between positive and negative higher forces, whether they're alien, angelic, demonic, you know, hyperdimensional, whatever, that are going on behind the scenes. And we, as conscious humans, just kind of living our lives obliviously, we play out a lot of these already pre-made agreements as we are going through our lives in our everyday thing. But fortunately, we do have enough free will that if we tap into our intuition, our wisdom, our experience, if we learn from our lessons and our experiences, we can become active participants in this war so that we're not just puppets being blown by the wind, but we are actual like good knights or good soldiers that are here making the right decisions and almost like planting the flag of what we align with. If you align with spirit, with your heart, with intuition, with wisdom, you plant that flag through every action that you take, every word that you speak, every decision that you make affects things physically right here, right now, and you have inside access to the matrix when you're here versus these higher forces that seem to be outside of it, and so it's more indirect, but it seems like their battle is happening through us. And so it's very important to conquer the battle within yourself, between your higher aspects and your lower ego, shadow, trauma, negative programming aspects. Because the more you win that internal battle, the more you're contributing to the success of the external battle on the side of good.
Let's maybe we might be coming, our time lot. Let's talk about love. Why not finish it up here? How would you describe self-love then? A lot of people say you have to love yourself. You've mentioned
Yeah.
if you accept yourself, you're more apt to engage with your own free will, let's say. So how would you define that?
Yeah. Well, one thing I want to mention on that is so there's a fallacy that I've seen come up where if you have, let's say, a compulsion to steal, or let's say pornography, or just something that's kind of salacious and not spirit oriented, that if you say, okay, well, okay, so that stuff, that's part of my shadow, it's part of my shadow side, and people are telling me to integrate with my shadow or accept my shadow. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean that you decide, you know what, that's who I am, that's who I'm going to be, and I'm okay with stealing and exploiting and pornography and all this kind of stuff? Is that what it means to accept and love yourself? Only if you are part of the left-hand path, let's say Satanism or Luciferianism or something. That's the sort of thing they do. They got the motto, do what thou wilt. Do what you want to do. But the problem is, they're not figuring out, well, which part of their will is truly them. You see, because we are actually dual beings. We have a higher will and we have a lower will. And the lower will actually isn't us. It's one of those artificial graphs that I mentioned at the beginning of our interview, where it's a thing that has been pushed upon you, and it's not something that you were necessarily born with. It is something that developed in you as a twisting or distortion of your natural drives. Okay, maybe due to abandonment issues or some sort of sexual trauma, or even some weird genetic quirk that gives you a weird sexual fetish that is kind of weird, but it's like some weird miswiring in your brain. But the thing is, if you accept these artificial graphs as who you are, then you're almost like it's almost like Stockholm syndrome, where now you're covering for your hostage taker. You're defending your hostage taker against the hostage rescue team,
Mm.
you know, and so that's why these higher positive forces, they can't do much for you if you willingly align with that. So what integration really means is simply acknowledging that it exists, okay, accepting that it is an issue that you have, instead of denying it, suppressing it, and projecting it upon the outside world, upon
Mm.
others. See, because there's a lot of people with shadow issues, they project it upon others. They blame others for what they themselves are doing or engaging in because they kind of feel insecure about it. So they'd rather blame others, and by expunging them, they feel better about themselves. They almost feel like they've gotten rid of their own internal thing. And that's a weird, twisted psychology that I don't know if aliens have it, but humans certainly have it, you know? So maybe we're unique in that aspect, that we have these weird psychological quirks. So integration simply means acknowledging it and dealing with it, like knowing what to do. And if that dealing means overcoming it, releasing it, doing some sort of inner therapy or work or something to get over it, then that's what it means. Okay. But so okay, so getting back to your question, the idea of self-love, ultimately it has to do with the fact that you don't punish yourself and hate yourself or feel embarrassed for yourself over your flaws. You acknowledge that there is a good part within you, a higher part within you that does not deserve that blame, and that you accept that for who it is, the fact that it can have flaws, but it doesn't mean that you accept the flaws themselves in the sense of like integrating it into your personality and saying it's okay, right? It means acknowledging who you truly are, what your true drives are, and having love for it. Now, if there is a lower part of your mind, like your lower self, that has these flaws, you can love that too, right? You can love it as you would love your own child that uh, maybe when he goes to school, he's not strong enough and he gets picked on and beat up. Like you don't blame the child for getting beat up. You say like, oh, you're a weak little weakling. You don't do that. You love the child and you support the child and you try to steer the child towards becoming stronger, not fearing as much, being able to stand up for himself. And you do the same thing to yourself. So the thing is, one trick that you can do, which is an interesting meditation exercise, is you focus in on your own self-awareness. Okay, so you focus on your own self-awareness, just the sense that, yep, I'm alive, I exist, I can sense that I exist because I'm aware. Okay, so that observer within you. And when you do that, you're shifting out of the ego character mask that you normally have on, that you're normally identifying with, your regular lower human self with your work tasks and dramas and problems and so on. You kind of step out of that and you come back to your sense of selfness or aliveness or awareness. Okay, so you return to that. And what you can notice is that this neutral observer within you, which is you, the I within the I, uh, no matter what drama you're going through, it remains kind of neutral, even amused. So if you're like moping and kind of wallowing in a lower state normally, when you return to that inner witness state, you can kind of look at that and feel almost amused, like okay, like I know that I'm playing this human character. I know that I'm kind of trying to muster the sadness or anger or whatever within me, but okay, but really I don't actually feel like that, but I do if I forget myself and I enter into that state. So if you return to the state, you can tap into that amusement, you can tap into that neutrality, and you can invoke in that state a sense of sympathy and love and care for your lower human self. Okay. So you can actually shift into a higher form and give love and compassion to your regular human ego lower self. Okay. And when you do that, what ends up happening is you end up setting, you do two things. Number one, you detach, you disidentify from the lower flawed mortal version of you and you shift into the immortal, transpersonal, or impersonal part of you. Okay, that's one thing you do. And the other thing you do is you send energy from that true higher part of you to your lower part, which ends up having a very healing and supportive effect. So then, therefore, when you kind of get out of this meditation and return to your regular self, you'll feel better because now you have this numinous charge from your higher self that has been brought down. And so it creates a self-reinforcing positive feedback loop where now because you feel better as a lower self, then therefore it's even easier to shift into that higher impersonal, amused, positive state and vice versa, and so you can do this on a daily basis. And it's one of the more rapid ways of achieving inner work in a proper way. So I like to do that from time to time.
No, it's one of the most beautiful ways I've ever heard of self-love. You gave someone something they specifically can act on, which to me
Yep.
is invaluable. An action that will help you integrate, some of the not so nice things we've all done or experienced or felt or had the mischance, as you said, of having become part of our life at one point or another.
Yeah, yeah. And then we'll mention just one more
Sure.
exercise that you can do, which is that if you have ever been traumatized by someone, betrayed by them, maybe as a toxic parent or an ex, a terrible marriage or something like that. A lot of times you don't have the opportunity to physically visit them and tell them what you have always wanted to say to them. Okay. But what you can do is you can do that in your mind. You can hold them before you. Okay. And I have a friend who told me this technique, and I've sort of done it myself too, and it's pretty effective. And in your mind, in a meditation, in a nap or something like that, you just picture them and you just sit them down and you make them listen. and you tell them everything they've wanted to say. You just kind of like let it out. And if you're someone who loves writing, then just write it out, on paper with your hand, or on a text thing. And it's sort of like that technique of writing a letter but then burning it. It's a similar idea. You kind of like let it out, and because you're doing it in your mind in the present moment, it's a little bit more effective than just being intellectual about it, where you write like a 2-column checklist, like, oh, this is what I like about myself, and this is what I hate about you, and I wish you would forgive me. Like instead of doing it all intellectually, like sorting out what you need to do, you do it in the present moment, and you do it as if they were actually before you. So the thing is, when you do that, not only are you releasing a lot of this pent up energy within you, but you're also probably addressing their higher self. Or if they are departed, they might actually be hanging around in a non-physical state and hearing what you're saying. So you can still get closure even after they've died by doing this particular technique. So if you combine that with the other, I think you can make a lot of progress.
Wonderful. Well, this talk has gone in ways I didn't expect, but it's been more wonderful than I could have imagined. So I want to
Yeah.
thank you. Yeah, it's been great. Went more personal than I expected, away from the demons, but I think you've given the viewers tons of useful hints and tricks and ways that they can help themselves to a better life, which for me is why I'm here doing this. So I appreciate everything you shared, Tom.
Yeah, sure thing. I mean, I was really happy that we went in this particular direction because we're dealing with the most practical, personal, spiritual matters, the things that affect pretty much everyone here. Yeah, and I do like to get into the more practical, spiritual side of it, because some of these other topics that I talk about, they're interesting from an intellectual perspective,
Mm,
and they induce a lot of awe and wonder, and oh wow, that's pretty cool. But it's not as hard hitting or as useful and pertinent to the minute that we exist in right now. So
I
yeah,
agree.
so thank you for asking these questions.
For sure. Too many people are just interested in being entertained by some of this instead of actually, getting to the nitty-gritty of helping themselves to the better life that, like I said, without blame, everyone seems they want, and not enough of us, in my opinion, are willing to, grab the demon by the short hairs and, shake it down to help yourself to a better life. So thank you
Yeah.
again, Tom. Please like and subscribe, everyone. I'll let Tom know when this is out. If anyone has any questions for perhaps future chats, please let us know. And once again, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for being here.